Birds. They sing song. Okay.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
going. There you
It's
go. Yep, yep. Mm. Welcome. It's the Trippin' Thompsons podcast, and this is episode number 9. And I'm Victor, one of the co-hosts.
and I'm Brikkelle, the other one.
The other one, yes, that's true.
Hmm.
You.
Thank you.
So, what did you want to talk about today?
Well, we're going to talk about something to get you off of talking about the weather today.
Oh, the weather. Yeah. You know what? It was 90 earlier this week. Now it's 46. So just to give you so we're about half.
We are about half. But you know what? We didn't get snow. So there's
No, we didn't get snow. We
a
got some rain, which we
silver
needed.
lining.
Yeah.
We did. But we need it. We need it.
We needed rain. Now if they can get some up north, that'll be really good because I heard there's a lot of fires up there. So it's yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully it's heading that way. Yeah, absolutely. So, just like the area that we're in and the shifts in the weather and how it pivots all over the place. We've been
Mm-hmm.
talking about career pivots
Mm-hmm.
and, the journeys we've been on, the number of pivots that we've made, but then also, the within our network and the people that we coach and guide and instruct and work with. And um, wow, like the field of pivots is pretty radical. How many
Mm.
people who have had pivots in their career, and it can go in so many different directions.
Mm-hmm.
People who maybe they come out of high school and they know that, you know what, I just want to launch this, and they start a career as an entrepreneur. People who have been maybe in industry or corporate jobs for decades and then decide I want to step out of it and I want to become an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, it's endless. You can go in so many different directions, but this is such a fascinating topic, but it's also a topic that really can help release people to recognize that you're not stuck. The lane that you're in or the pathway that you're on,
Mm-hmm.
there are endless pivots along the way. But it's really kind of how do I figure this out and how do I approach it with thought and with resources that can help me and guide me constructively.
Yeah, statistically, 49% of professionals are considering a career change,
Wow.
which is about the percentage of the temperature today, right? About half of where it was.
Yep.
But in my mind, though, the other 51%, they're just lying to themselves.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It
How
makes
many
one
people do
wonder.
we know? Right? I mean, how many people do we know? I mean, if you surveyed our not just our audience, but just the people in our circles,
Yeah.
I mean, that number is really low to me. It's it is closer to 100%.
Mm, exactly. Exactly. I hear you. I think that's fair. I think that's a very fair comment. And, as we're talking today about this topic about career pivots, is that, we're talking about reinvention and how do you continue to move yourself forward and have growth in life and in your career journey. And how do you look at purposeful pivots? Sometimes you stumble into them unknowingly and it can grow into something really pretty cool too. But it's
Hmm.
not about, um, gosh, I have to abandon everything that I've learned, I've known, I've done, or I have to start over completely. It's not that at all. It's about how do I think about repackaging, repurposing those things, and especially if you can do it with the things that you really enjoy and have passion, the things that energize you. Um, Gosh, even better. And so I think that's kind of where we're going to go with today's episode.
Yeah, and we'll share some stories of people that we researched, and we're gonna also share some tools and just understand that this process, this path isn't linear. It's
Mhm.
actually more chaotic oftentimes. And it turns out that even if it feels unintentional, it might be intentional. Right. So,
Y Yeah, it is. Well, let's get busy. Let's start
okay.
pivoting.
Okay. Well, let's pivot into mindset because that's a great place to start, right? Mindset's always a great place to start. And we can talk
Yes.
about Dr. Aisha Haruna,
Mhm.
who was a pharmaceutical scientist and
Mm.
had a child, and then during that maternity leave, she began a side hustle where she was coaching women of color on workplace bias and burnout. Right, so there's, I mean,
Mm.
if you're a woman or if you're a person of color, you can probably raise your hand right now and say, "Hey, you know what? Have I felt workplace bias? Has there been some burnout that I've experienced?" Right.
Mhm.
Well, that's what she started. And now that's a global DEI consulting agency.
Oh my gosh, so cool.
Hmm.
And yeah, whether this was managed chaos or some intentionality behind it or whatever is I really like her story, and the pivot wasn't about abandoning her expertise.
Hmm.
That she's this pharmaceutical scientist. You think about that role, oh my gosh, just a very long list of skills and capabilities that somebody needs to do that work. But
Hmm.
for her and for all of us, it's about tapping into repurposing it, repurposing and it being our expertise.
Hmm.
That's the key piece that we need to tap into. So let's look at the first tool that can be considered, and especially kind of depending on where you're at in your journey, is called the core competency scan. And this is a
Hmm.
quick way to figure out what skills that you do have and then how to repurpose them for a new role, a new industry, or to launch into entrepreneurship.
Hmm.
And there's 3 steps or 3 actions basically that people can take around this. And you start out with listing 3 to 5. It doesn't need to be more than this. So it's not about asking you to just exhaust the list of your skills. We
Hmm.
know all of you have tons of them, but just being really thoughtful and especially focus on the ones that you really enjoy. So 3 to
Hmm.
5 that you enjoy, that you use every day in your work or your life. So this could be a people related skill, like a relationship. It could be a technical skill. It could be a skill that is based on a type of function, or maybe it's a trade skill. So just to get your minds and starting to turn a little bit and start to think about for you, reflecting on the skills that you have. And
Hmm.
then think about where else besides the job or the industry that you're in today, where else those skills are needed. And then where else could these skills help solve problems? And that's really big, right? In order to have success in how we think about the reinvention process, is that we need things, whether it's a product or it's a service, to help solve problems for other people. And then the last step or action you take is imagine how you describe that skill to somebody outside of your field. And the reason that we want you to do this is that it helps you get out of maybe thinking about that skill in a minimizing way or a simplistic way, because it's natural to just attach it to, well, I kind of do this every day in my job, and so this is kind of how I describe it. But how do I describe it to somebody who doesn't either understand the job, doesn't understand the industry? Now it helps you expand the way you consider and think about this skill in
Hmm.
a broader, deeper sense. And
Hmm.
so what could be some examples that the viewers could contemplate?
Well, certainly one is like if you manage a team, for instance, there's leadership skills that can be involved in that. And those are transferable across industry, across disciplines. You know, you could go from nonprofit to for profit. You could go from startup to or to a Fortune 50 company, or vice versa. You
Mhm.
could do what you and I have done. We also took our leadership skills and coached youth sports teams, right? I mean, you
Yep.
can literally pivot with something like a leadership skill or analytical skills or things like that. You could pivot into lots of different areas. I mean, think about it. I mean, what's um, something that's valuable that you bring to the table that could be applied in another area, and you probably already do apply it in another area, right?
Yeah, most likely, people do, unless it's like the highly technical skill. Like if you're a brain surgeon, yeah, maybe even within that, there's layers of skills now that I say it that are applicable in other places. So yeah, and that's the thing is like, gosh, now when we start pause and really think about the skill doesn't just serve me today in this role, in this company, in this industry. It's
Hmm.
multifaceted. Um, and thinking about conversations that I've had, I'm sure you've had too, and maybe acknowledging people for their contributions, their accomplishments, and oftentimes people just minimize that kind of recognition and bring it down into a response of, well, you know what, that's just my job, that's just what's expected of me, that's what I'm supposed to do. And again, I think you've heard these comments too. And are there certain skills or any skills that come to mind that you hear from individuals that they're really undermining or underserving and not valuing just because they look at it as it's just my job.
Mm. Well, I mean, you say underserving. I mean, the service industry, like servers in restaurants and also coffee shops and places like that, they tend to label themselves. I've heard them say things like, "Well, I'm just a server," right?
Mm,
If you think about all the skills that they bring into being an effective server, right? I mean, if you take someone's order, you have to, know how to interpret what they're saying so that you can actually make it can be made the way they want it made, even if they're not communicating exactly what they mean, right? Um, and you also have this nature of being able to help people who may not be feeling really good or really positive. They come into a place and you can help them feel so much better when they leave. Those are skill sets that you can take and you can transfer them elsewhere, right?
mhm. Yep, absolutely. So it starts with mindset and
Hmm.
getting that right and recognizing that there's a lot of skills that all of you possess that can be repurposed into something else. And then the tool to use for that is the core competency scan. So that helps get you to start navigating that. How do I think about the skills I have and where else could they be utilized? The next area that we're going to explore, so building on the mindset piece of it, is the brand reframe.
Mm.
And we want to highlight somebody who I'm guessing not a lot of people know about this individual, but his name is Kudzi Chikumbo. And Kudzi is a Zimbabwean born former finance exec. So this is just part of his story so far. I'm going to pause just for a moment because when I say a finance exec, what's just popping into your mind about how you would think about the characteristics that would profile a finance exec?
Well, I know what I think about. I think about somebody who is very cautious and very um, risk averse, typically trying to be conservative in how they take a look at things so that, they don't create more stress for their organization. They're also possibly somebody who's extremely analytical and um, maybe even introverted.
Hmm, okay. Um, and so here we've got this profile, and maybe that's kind of relatable to a lot of you when you hear the term finance exec. It's like, yeah, that's kind of either what I've experienced or how I visualize individuals in that field. But Kudzi went from being a former financial executive to become the global head of creator marketing at TikTok. And
Hmm,
it's like, you know, again, even as I'm saying it and reading up on him, I just think about how did those two dots figure out a way to connect to each other? And so obviously, he has some skills that he possessed and expertise that he
mhm.
was able to tap into to help navigate him to that place. Um, and so when we think about this, how would you kind of look at what those identities could be?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because I think he pulled together like his different like skill sets,
Mhm.
corporate strategy, which he got from, being a finance exec. He had been around other environments and he was fascinated by the digital culture. And he also was big into social advocacy, which, allowed him, later on to also start up a candle making company. So I mean, he's pivoted
Mm.
multiple times, and he you might consider using a tool called the Brand X-ray, which is a reflection tool that allows you to uncover what makes you stand out. So when we talk about brands these days, and I heard this very recently, is it's not about it's not just about your past experience. It's also about how do you brand yourself. So, and a brand is about things that make you stand out. So, what do people always ask you for advice for? What do you do differently than your peers? What fires you up when you're talking about when you're in the middle of a conversation? So, when you think about these things, when you think about your passions and the things that people you become a go-to for, what types of themes consistently show up that you could label for yourself as a brand that you have, right? I mean, I, I think one of the things Kuzi talked about was his authenticity as well. So I mean, he understood that he could be transparent, which is
Mhm.
something that would be important in finance, right? But it also be important as you transition through to being the the head of creator marketing at TikTok, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely. So, some examples around this is that your expertise, it can be a hard skill, it could be a soft skill.
yeah.
You could be the person that's really calm amongst any type of form of chaos that might be happening. Well, that's part of your brand is that, in high pressure moments, you know how to stay really steady. We could look at the complete opposite of that, and not to say that somebody's unhinged, but you're kind of the hype person, and
Mhm.
and you know how to rally the energy and get people motivated and plug into passion and bring kind of that, hey, can do, we've got this, yay rah rah team. These are all parts of brand that are really important. And again, the expertise can also be in hard skills too, and we all possess those, of course. So just getting some ideas so you can start to think about different ways in which you bring skills and expertise into the brand of who you are.
Mm. So, what's one thing that people come to you for, Brikkelle, even outside of work?
Yeah. Um, I would say one of the consistent ones is about confidence and, people feeling or lacking confidence to be able to, in the heat of things or when there might be power differentials, When challenges come forward or something's being confronted, conflict maybe seeps in.
Hmm.
Um, Confidence is an area that people are wanting to continue to work on. Um, I as I say that, I kinda laugh a little bit because some of the conversations are more about people want the situation to go away, so they don't
Yeah.
have to express the confidence, but we don't have control over that, and so being able to have that skill and, but that's one area, that kind of rings true for me, and then, I think about with Koodzy's personal brand and how he was able to open doors that he didn't even know existed as he started this, finance exec position and these skills and expertise areas that he had that you can get into a job, you can get into an industry, and it just becomes like our tunnel vision that we start making those connections that I do this work because I have these skills. I have these skills because they apply to this job.
Hmm.
Um, but he found a way that helped him pivot, and we all can find the way to help us pivot. And then here he was, he showed up online as his full authentic self, and then things started to snowball and carried him into a really radically different opportunity.
That's true. Yeah, no, you're right. And I mean, not only him, but also there are others. I mean, there was another individual we were thinking about, and as we pivot into talking about something that's common amongst everyone we brought up, is this: they didn't do this just once; they did this multiple times.
Mhm,
There was Tristan, excuse me, Walker, who started off in Wall Street. He was an intern for a Wall Street company. Then he like pivoted to Silicon Valley. So not only did he pivot in his career, he also pivoted location wise, right? From
mhm,
East Coast to West Coast. And then he pivoted to launching a shaving line called Bevel for that was tailored toward black men. So he's done this multiple times, and then I recently found out he then sold it to Procter and Gamble not that long ago. So even though he's still working as like the CEO, who's to say he's not already looking at his next pivot,
mhm.
right?
Yeah, and just even in that sharing of his story so far is that there's so many pivots that he went through. Going from Wall Street to Silicon Valley is a major pivot. Um, Culture of industry is a
Mm,
pivot.
that's
Culture of
true.
people, saturation East Coast, saturation West Coast. That's a big pivot. Going from working for an organization to being an entrepreneur. Um, and then also now working in a completely different industry space
Hmm.
as he launched this shaving line. And it seems like part of his motivation within that, right, is that solving problems, and
Hmm.
his identity was being ignored, and he found an opportunity to center himself in an experience and something that he is deserving of, and then recognizing that, hey, I fit um the profile or maybe connect to a lot of other people who look like me, have shared experiences I do. And so now he becomes this individual who is anchored into this culturally rooted entrepreneurship journey because he opened himself up to a pivot. And maybe again, he was trying to solve a problem for himself. And then
Hmm.
through that, discovered this is something that he wanted to continue to walk down and create an entrepreneurship journey out of.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it could have been for himself. I mean, whatever it is, he followed what I call the pain plus purpose pattern, right? You're looking for a problem, and I know not every problem is, as you brought up earlier, Brikkelle, is like is a prob has to be a pain point.
Mhm.
But from a human perspective, we tend to, gravitate towards solving our pain issues before we pursue our pleasure. So if you can solve a problem like this, creating pain for people, and literally for black men's skin, that actually can create pain when you're using the wrong types of devices and shaving cream and things like that. Um, so you solve that problem because one, you understand it deeply, you care about it deeply, and then you're also solving other people's problems as well. So a tool you could potentially use for this, which allows you to start your pivot, is something called the side hustle incubator. So it's a way for you, even in your current role that you might be in a full-time job, for you to test an idea you have in a
Mhm.
low stakes, low risk kind of format before you go all in, right?
Hmm. Okay.
So,
So how would somebody do this?
well, I mean, you set aside maybe 4 to 5 hours a month. You can start right away. If you got an idea right now, set aside 4 to 5 hours this month, and then take the one idea that is exciting you, and then find out how it aligns with a real world gap that needs to be addressed. And then you start testing it. You could
Mhm.
test it with, just scribble something out on a piece of paper and create a concept, right? And say, hey, and show it to, people who are in your target market, and see how they respond to it. Or you could offer up a mini service or a beta concept, run a small event, and do something like that to understand how are people responding to this idea, and then how does it energize you to be a part of this type of a new process, new idea, new thought. Are you getting the energy from it that allows you to say, hey, this is something I really want to keep doing?
Mhm. Yeah, and there are endless examples out there, and now that we start to kind of recognize some of this, we'll see how many examples are really right in front of us on the daily. That there could be somebody who is doing some baking, and then they post their goods, baked
Mhm,
goods online, right? And from that, there are people that are like, "Wow, I really like that, and that looks delicious. Um, would you be willing to can I place an order with you? Would you be willing to do that for, like, a party that I'm hosting or an
mhm,
event I'm
mhm,
having?" You could be out in your, driveway working on your car, and you have a neighbor swing by like, "Hey, you know what? I've had this issue with my car. Any chance you would know anything about that?" "Well, yeah, actually, I do work on cars, and, let me come over and take a look." And then
mhm,
that neighbor goes to work and it's like, "Gosh, this issue I've been having with my car for months. My neighbor fixed it." And then all these people at work are like, "Oh, man, can you give me your neighbor's number? I've got something I'd like them to take a look at." It could be that you're really good at assessing situations, maybe from a financial standpoint, and people are thinking about, I want to grow my business. I want to invest into something. And so
mhm,
now you become person that people go to, or I'm having difficulty navigating my career, expanding who I am as a leader. I really need a coach. And then, you encounter somebody who provides coaching, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, is this a pivot for me? Do I want to become an executive coach? Do I want to become like a financial strategist? Do I want to become a mechanic and start my own shop? Again, it starts in just such soft ways, but easy ways that you can start testing it in a safe way to see,
mhm.
is this valid?
Mhm.
Is there enough out there to get us going? And so, what's the side project that you've seen, somebody try that totally shifted their career direction?
And, I was thinking about that, and there's somebody else I was coaching who actually I don't even know what his full time job was, but he would go home after his job, and he was a gamer, so he just like game. He would be gaming like to wee hours of the morning and try and get into these competitions and stuff like that. And lo and behold, his brother had this old bus that his brother, I think, was a mechanic. He brought up mechanics, right?
Mhm.
Or is a mechanic. And so he was working on this old bus and he was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with it now. And somehow it was kind of like the chocolate meets peanut butter Reese's peanut butter cup thing. It was like, well, what if we threw some video games on here and we created this whole market for having video game contests? And
Hmm.
all of a sudden he like assembled these different like old school video games, put them on this bus, and then he found people who actually wanted him to come to their kids' birthday parties, and he could park the bus at the
Yeah.
birthday party. Kids jump on the bus. It was a safe environment. They weren't going to these places where, parents didn't have control over it. Now, all of a sudden, he found
Parents
this
never
out.
have control.
Yeah, that's true. But you think you do, right?
You think you do.
And so overnight, he had this deal where on weekends now, that's what he was doing. It was his side
Hmm.
hustle. It was like, hey, and so he came in to, the entrepreneur class that I'm a part of. And he was like, how do I turn this into like a full-time deal? So now he
Mhm.
has these buses that he drives out there, and he had host competitions on them, and his next step was I don't even know how far he is with this, but he just reached out to me recently is to try and get some of the bigger like gaming companies to actually fund contests so that now you not only be doing this for birthday parties, but you're also doing this to bring people into these enclosed gaming environments where people would have contests and win cash prizes. So, hey,
Okay. Well, coming to neighborhoods all over, gaming buses. Watch out for
gaming
them.
buses. Yeah,
Yes.
maybe I
Yes.
shouldn't have talked too much about that. Somebody else might try and do that. Huh? But anyway,
So,
uh,
um, so we have a challenge for all of you viewers, and if you're looking at how do I get from point A to point B,
mhm,
that there's another tool that is really helpful, and it's looking at what does my future resume look like. And so, if you're challenged this week, two things that you're going to do, and the first one is that you're going to identify someone in a field or a job or an area that you're really curious about, and you're going to interview that person. Now, if interviewing somebody feels like really scary or you're intimidated about that, you're going to have a conversation with this individual in which you're going to ask questions to understand more. That's as simple as we're going to make it, right? It really is a simple thing to do. It doesn't have to be long. This could be a 20-minute conversation, it could be an hour-long conversation, but just go prepared. Make sure you have the questions set up and ready to fire away. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to create a future resume, and you want to think about not way down the road because there's way too much that can happen in a short period of time. But let's look at just 2 years from now. Where do you see yourself being 2 years from now if you could go after like that dream job? And so what we're going to do is have you structure in a creative way, reverse engineer your next move by imagining what does that future resume look like. So you're going to do four things. You're going to write your future resume. You're going to date it again 2 years from now. you don't need to go into a ton of detail, right? So what's your title? What are key skills that you need to bring? Who's this going to serve? What capabilities might you have? And then you're going to compare your current role or your current resume to looking at the future state one. And then what you're going to analyze or explore is that gap in between. So that's the pathway about what's missing, what's getting in the way from me going from point A to point B.
Hmm.
And from that, you're going to map out, okay, now that I understand this gap, is there anything within that that I need to learn? Or is there anything that I need to do? Or do I need to try? Do I just need to have the confidence? This comes back up again. Step out and just do it. Because maybe you possess all the things that are needed, but now because you have those things that are needed, you haven't applied them in a different way. And so now, how does this connect to a different space, a different audience? And from that, you're going to learn a whole lot more. So, as we think about this future resume test, what are some examples that come up for you? What do you think about?
Well, one example that just popped in my head all of a sudden
Yeah.
was, think about if you are like a trainer, like you're in learning and development, you're a trainer for a corporate organization, but you also have this passion for raising dogs. And you could take your skills as a trainer and you could actually become this person who teaches like new dog owners how to actually get their dogs to behave and not bark during the middle of a podcast or something like that. It could be really fascinating. You could label yourself as the dog whisperer, right? I mean, that would be an example. I mean,
That
well,
would.
yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean,
even with that example, is that you wouldn't even necessarily I think that that was a really nice connection, right? Looking at corporate trainer, understanding how to put together a program and an educational process, that type of thing. Um, but it even could be somebody that, I haven't coached or guided or trained anybody before. I haven't presented. I haven't done those types
mhm,
of things,
mhm,
but I absolutely love animals. I'm so passionate about animals. Well,
mhm,
that passion alone is something that can carry your pivot. But now you're going to do with that resume test, just recognize, okay, are there things I need to learn or get skill or do so that I
mhm.
can be successful with this pivot?
That's a good point. I mean, in fact, there's something I read years ago that says, if that person went out and they read actually two books on how to actually, train dogs and help people learn how to train dogs, they would know more than 90% of the population. And if they read three, they'd know more than 99% of the population. So literally, you can become an expert in something
Mm,
by, well, you could go interview people too, right?
yep.
And be a knowledge, you gain the knowledge and then you become a knowledge broker. So when you think about your resume,
Hmm.
Brikkelle, like think out 2027, it's
Okay.
May,
It's me.
and it's actually warmer.
Yes.
What one bullet point would we see on your resume 2 years
Ooh.
from now that isn't there today?
Ooh, this is exciting. Okay. Um, Global philanthropist
Ooh,
would be
sounds
on my
interesting.
resume. Yeah.
Say more.
Yeah. So I guess what I see with this is the ability to financially contribute to people and animal causes and on a global scale, help put people and animals in a much better situations. And in order for that end of the pipeline to happen, all of my businesses and business interactions, et cetera, need to be thriving and highly successful.
Hmm. Okay. No, that's a great example, and hopefully that's something that the listeners can take away, because she said this is a challenge, right? So we want you to, post, right? So
Mhm.
go to, our YouTube channel, or in the comments, or on Instagram, and use hashtag pivot playbook so that we know that we're talking about this particular challenge. And we want to feature some of the more creative and courageous entries. So don't have any shame behind reinventing yourself, right? Because there's not failure in doing it, it's
Mhm.
evolution from doing
Mhm.
it, right?
It is. It absolutely is. And these experiences can happen at any stage in life. We hear these stories about this 12-year-old who was tinkering around with something and then all of a sudden launched a business, to maybe somebody who was in their 90s and they went back to school and they got a degree.
Mhm.
And then, and I'm not trying to anchor it in any way, but it literally can happen anywhere in life. So you're never too young, you're never too old, you're never too late, you're never too early.
Mhm.
Know that the average individual is around their 40s, as far as,
Mhm.
like, founders of an organization and going on that entrepreneurial journey. And so wherever you may be, you might be early to it, you might be right in kind of that sweet spot of the average, or you might be a little bit beyond it. But the thing
Because
is,
Colonel Sanders was like what, 65 or something when he like
started
first
driving around his
launched it.
car.
Yeah, and he
Yeah.
became a billionaire when he was in his 70s. So it's just like, isn't that crazy?
It is crazy because now what's in my head is thinking about who in today's world would trust anybody driving around in their vehicle selling chicken out of the trunk of their car.
Yeah, well,
Uh,
probably not too many.
See, everything has a time and a purpose,
Yeah.
and what he did was serving a pain point for people.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm gonna wrap this up. We've got some prompts, and we want you to think about wherever you are in your journey. There's the 4 tools that we talked about that are going to help support you and get you well on your way. It's just identifying what's workable for me right now. And try one. If it doesn't work for you, try another, but don't give up on yourself. Keep going. So if you need clarity, try the core competency scan. If you want to think about, gosh, how do I differentiate? How do I stand out? Do the brand x ray. If you're
Mhm.
curious about exploring something new, well, then go ahead and run that sidebar hustle incubator. Test it out. And then
Mhm.
if you're thinking about, I really need some sort of a playbook to kind of help me out with this, or I need a guide around it, draft your future resume. That's going to help provide that pathway for you.
Mhm. Those are all things you should try out, because remember, reinvention is not reckless, it's radical clarity in motion.
Ooh,
And clarity is a power move, right? So we want you to take that move.
yes. And your pivots are not a detour. It's just really getting you into that next chapter, or maybe it's the open door into the next chapter of your legacy. But you've got to get busy. You've got to take the step, take the actions to make it happen. So get this thing written and get going.
That's right. Let's go out there and pivot like a
Pivot
pro.
like a pro.
We're out.
We're out.